Have you ever said yes when every part of you wanted to say no? Have you ever apologized for something that was not your fault just to stop the tension in the room? Have you ever worked so hard to make everyone around you comfortable that you completely forgot to ask whether you were comfortable too? If that sounds familiar, you probably grew up being told you were a good person for it. That being nice was a virtue. That putting others first was something to be proud of. Nobody told you the other side of that story. Nobody told you what it was actually costing you. And the cost is real. But before you can see it clearly, you have to understand what being too nice actually is. Because it sounds like a compliment. It sounds like something that could not possibly be a problem. In a world full of people who are cruel and selfish and indifferent, being the one who is always kind and always there seems like a good thing. And on the surface it is. But underneath the surface, something else is happening. Something that has nothing to do with genuine kindness and everything to do with fear. The person who is too nice is not always nice because they want to be. They are nice because they learned a long time ago that not being nice had consequences they could not afford. That lesson almost always starts in childhood. Children who grow up in unpredictable environments learn very quickly that keeping the people around them happy is a survival strategy. When a parent's mood determines the safety of the whole house, a child learns to read the room obsessively. They learn to anticipate what is needed before it is asked for. They learn to smooth things over, to absorb tension, to make themselves as agreeable and low conflict as possible. They become experts at making other people comfortable, and they carry that expertise into every room they ever walk into for the rest of their life. Some children learn it differently, not from chaos but from conditional love, from a home where warmth was given when they performed well and withdrawn when they did not, where being good, being easy, being the child who caused no problems was how they earned their place. These children did not learn that love was unconditional. They learned that love was a transaction, and the currency was niceness, agreeableness, self-erasure, and so they kept paying, year after year, in relationship after relationship, never fully realizing that the transaction was costing them everything they had. So by the time they reach adulthood, the pattern is already set. It is not a habit they chose. It is a wiring they inherited from the experiences that built them, and it shows up in very specific ways. They cannot receive someone else's anger without immediately trying to fix it. They cannot sit with someone's disappointment without feeling personally responsible for it. Other people's emotions feel like emergencies to them, like something that requires an immediate response, like something they are personally accountable for managing. That is not empathy. That is a nervous system that was trained to treat other people's feelings as more important and more urgent than their own. And so, they move through every room, watching everything, tracking every shift in mood, every change in energy, every slight tension in someone's face. They are always 3 steps ahead of conflict, already working to prevent something that has not happened yet. They laugh at jokes they do not find funny. They agree with opinions they do not share. They stay in conversations they want to leave. They take on tasks they do not have time for. They smile through things that deserve a completely different response. And they do all of it automatically, without thinking, without even noticing that they are doing it, without ever stopping to ask what it is doing to them. Over time, that automatic performance takes something from them, something quiet but significant. They lose track of what they actually think, what they actually feel, what they actually want. When your entire operating system is built around reading and responding to other people, your own internal signals get quieter and quieter until they almost disappear. Too nice people often cannot answer simple questions about themselves. What do you want for dinner? What do you enjoy? What do you actually think about this? They hesitate. They deflect. They say whatever the other person wants to hear, because they have spent so long prioritizing everyone else that they genuinely do not know what they themselves need anymore. And then underneath all of that, something else starts to build. Something they rarely let themselves name. Resentment. The quiet, heavy nowhere to put it. Resentment that comes from giving endlessly and never receiving. From saying yes when you mean no so many times that the weight of all those yeses becomes unbearable. Too nice people are not immune to anger. They feel it deeply. But they have no acceptable way to express it. Because expressing it would mean admitting that they have needs that are not being met. And admitting that would risk the one thing they have structured their entire life around protecting: being seen as good, being liked, being safe. So the anger goes inward instead. It becomes self-criticism, anxiety, a low-level sadness with no obvious cause. Physical symptoms that doctors cannot quite explain. Fatigue that sleep does not fix. A persistent sense that something is wrong, but an inability to name what it is. The body keeps score when the mind refuses to. And a body that has been carrying suppressed needs and suppressed anger and suppressed truth for years will eventually find a way to make itself heard. Not in words, in symptoms, in the quiet collapse that happens when a person has been performing okay for so long that they finally have nothing left to perform with. And while all of this is happening on the inside, something else is happening on the outside. Too nice people are disproportionately likely to end up in relationships with people who take advantage of them. Not always deliberately, not always with malicious intent, but users find accommodators the way water finds the lowest point. When you signal clearly through your behavior that your needs come last, that you will absorb conflict without complaint, that your boundaries are negotiable, certain kinds of people will find that extremely comfortable, and the too nice person will stay long past the point where they should leave. Because leaving feels selfish, because they keep believing that if they just give a little more, things will finally change. They will not change. Not because the other person is irredeemable, but because there is no incentive to change. The dynamic works perfectly for the person who takes. It stops working the moment the too nice person stops performing niceness. Which is exactly why they are so afraid to stop. Because they learned that changing the dynamic means losing the relationship. And losing the relationship means being alone. And being alone means confirming the thing they have always secretly feared: that without the niceness, there is nothing left to make them worth keeping. That the performance was not just something they did, it was the only reason anyone stayed. That fear, that without the performance they are not enough, is the engine underneath all of it. It is why they cannot stop even when they are exhausted, even when they can see clearly that they are giving more than they are getting. The performance of niceness is not just a habit, it is an identity. And dismantling it feels like dismantling the only version of themselves they know how to be. So they keep going, they keep smiling, they keep saying yes. And the gap between who they are performing and who they actually are gets wider and wider until it becomes a distance they do not know how to cross anymore. What makes it even more complicated is that being too nice is also a form of control. Not the obvious kind, not the loud, demanding kind, but a quiet, subtle, almost invisible kind. If I am always agreeable, nobody will be angry at me. If I always say yes, nobody will leave. If I always make myself useful, nobody will decide they do not need me. The niceness is not just about making others comfortable. It is about managing outcomes, about trying to guarantee safety through service, about controlling how people feel about you by never giving them a reason to feel anything negative. It is fear wearing the costume of generosity, and it is one of the loneliest costumes a person can wear, and people around them feel it. Not always consciously, but they feel it. There is a subtle pressure that comes from being around someone who never disagrees, who always accommodates, who has no visible edges. It feels nice at first, and then it starts to feel like something is missing, like the relationship is not quite real, like they are interacting with a version of the person rather than the person themselves. Too nice people often wonder why their relationships lack depth, why people seem to like them but not truly know them. The answer is that you cannot truly know someone who is always performing. You can only ever know the performance. And a performance, however convincing, is not a person. And while the outside world sees warmth and patience and endless generosity, the inside world looks completely different. The inner voice is harsh, critical, unforgiving. It calls them stupid for trusting people who keep letting them down. It punishes them for the anger they are not allowed to express outward. It holds them to a standard of perfection that nobody could meet and tears them apart for every small failure. The face they show the world is gentle. The face they show themselves is brutal. And that gap between the softness they perform for everyone else and the harshness they reserve for themselves, is one of the loneliest places a person can live inside their own head. Too nice people are often drawn to helping professions, caregiving, teaching, counseling. They are genuinely good at these things because their sensitivity and their ability to read people are real. But they are also doing something else in those roles. They are finding a context where their compulsion to put others first is not just accepted but celebrated, where the wound gets to wear the costume of a calling. And that makes it much harder to see. Because how do you question something that looks like a gift? How do you examine a pattern when the pattern keeps getting rewarded with gratitude and admiration and the brief, warm feeling of being needed by someone who actually shows it? The breaking point when it comes is usually not gradual. It is a moment. A moment where they have given so much for so long that there is simply nothing left. Where they say yes to one more thing and feel something inside them go quiet in a way that frightens them. Or where they watch someone take from them without a second thought and feel for the first time not just hurt but furious. That fury matters. It is the first honest thing they have felt in a long time. It is the self finally speaking at a volume that cannot be ignored, and even then the guilt follows immediately, the anger and then the shame of the anger, the wanting to pull back and then the imagining of every disappointed face. Because the pattern does not break easily. It was built over years. It is held in place by fear that goes all the way down. And the idea of being someone who is not endlessly giving feels so foreign, so uncomfortable. So dangerously close to being the kind of person they always feared they were underneath the niceness, selfish, unlovable, not enough, that even seeing it clearly does not make stopping simple. Seeing it and changing it are two very different things, and most too nice people spend a long time in the space between those two things, knowing, and still not quite being able to stop, because the fear is louder than the knowing, at least for now. But here is what that space reveals. The people who walked away when the performance stopped were never really there for them. They were there for what was being provided, for the comfort and the accommodation and the guaranteed yes. When that stopped being on offer, so did they. That is painful. But it is also the clearest possible information about what those relationships were actually built on, and about what is possible instead. Relationships where you are wanted not for what you provide, but for who you actually are. Relationships where your no is respected, where your needs are treated as real, where you are not required to disappear in order to be loved. Those relationships are possible, but they cannot be built on a performance. They can only be built on something real, and real means showing the parts that have been carefully hidden, the real thoughts, the real limits, the occasional no, the anger that surfaces when something is genuinely wrong, the needs that exist whether they are expressed or not. None of those things make a person unlovable. They make a person whole. And wholeness, actual unguarded "this is who I am" wholeness, is the only foundation that real connection can stand on. Not the appearance of connection, the actual thing, which is the only version worth having. Think about what you have said yes to in the last month that you did not want to say yes to. The conversations where you swallowed what you actually thought. The moments where you made yourself smaller to keep someone else comfortable. The times you apologized for things that were not your fault. The relationships where you are doing most of the giving and almost none of the receiving. Not to build a case against anyone, just to see it. Just to look honestly at the full picture of what the performance has actually looked like, because most too nice people have never done that. They have been too busy performing to stop and look at what the performance has cost them. The picture that emerges is not a picture of a kind person. It is a picture of a frightened one, afraid of conflict, afraid of rejection, afraid that who they are without the niceness is not someone people will choose to stay for. That fear is not a personality trait. It is a wound. It was put there by experiences that taught them that love was conditional and safety was earned, and their value was tied directly to how useful and agreeable they could make themselves. That was never the truth. It was just what they learned. And what you learn and what is true are not always the same thing. Sometimes they are not even close. The people who genuinely love you do not love the performance. They love you. And they cannot fully reach you as long as you are performing. As long as the real you, the one with opinions and limits and needs and occasional anger, is kept behind the niceness where it feels safe. The performance protects you from rejection. But it also guarantees a kind of loneliness that is harder to name than ordinary loneliness. The loneliness of being surrounded by people who care about you and knowing quietly that what they care about is not completely you. Just the version of you that you decided was safe enough to show. And that version has been standing between you and everything real for a very long time. You have been maintaining that version for so long that it probably does not feel like effort anymore. It probably just feels like who you are. The constant room reading, the automatic yes, the smile that comes before the feeling, the apology that arrives before the thought. You have been doing it so long and so well that you stopped noticing you were doing it at all. But underneath all of that maintenance, underneath all of that careful performance, there is a person who has been waiting, not impatiently, not angrily, just waiting, quietly, the way something waits when it has learned not to expect too much, but waiting nonetheless. That person is not too much. They are not unlovable. They are not selfish or broken, or the thing you always feared you were underneath the niceness. They are just real. And they have been real this whole time, underneath everything, waiting for the moment you stopped being so afraid of what would happen if you let them out. That moment is not a destination. It is not something you arrive at cleanly. It is something you catch glimpses of. In the moment you almost say no and feel your heart race. In the moment you almost say what you actually think and feel your stomach drop. In those moments, right there, in that fear, is the most honest version of you that has ever existed. It has always been there. You just kept covering it with sorry, with yes, with fine, with I don't mind, with whatever you need. It was always there, and it is still there now, waiting to be chosen by you.